Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our security webinar focused on Fairfax County and the Jewish community. I'm Ron Halber. I'm the Executive Director of the JCRC of Greater Washington. And I want to point out my colleagues, Vicki Fishman, Director of Government Relations and Community Relations in Virginia, and Lisa Silverman is my colleague, and the other folks are panelists, so I will introduce them in a moment. After we begin, before we begin, you should know that this program is being recorded. And also, if you want to access closed captioning, please click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Hello, Kenter Shaket. Had to say hello to my friend. The JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the Greater Washington area's Jewish community. And we represent the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington and more than 100 organizations, synagogues, and schools to advocate for the needs and values of the Jewish community and for the well-being of everybody in our region, including the most vulnerable. We're focused on government relations, advocating for Israel, combating anti-Semitism, strengthening ties with other communities, working in our region, schools, Holocaust education and commemoration, and security. After I introduce our guests and we hear from the panelists, I will moderate a Q&A session. We're a nice, compact, good group. If you have a question, please just put your name in the Q&A module and I'll call on you, and then you just unmute yourself. To get as many questions in as possible, please try to be succinct. We will close down at the 8 o'clock hour. Kevin Davis currently serves as police chief for the Fairfax County Police Department, Virginia's largest police agency and the nation's 32nd largest. Davis led the Baltimore Police Department as its 39th police commissioner from 2015 to 2018, following a period of historic unrest and during the Department of Justice's civil rights investigation. Davis has built a reputation, I know this, as he worked with my colleagues in Baltimore, as a collaborative leader and a consensus builder among diverse community groups, faith communities, elected officials, law enforcement peers, and business partners. Prior to leading the nation's 8th largest police department in Baltimore, Davis served as police chief for the Anne Arundel County, Maryland Police Department and retired as the assistant police chief for the Prince George's County Department in Maryland. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the FBI National Executive Institute. He did a stint in the corporate world and served as Garda World's Director of Security Consulting, as Chief Officer for Armored Things in Boston. He is adjunct professor at American University and a lecturer at the Catholic University. Our second speaker will be Meredith Wiesel, my former colleague at JCRC. Meredith currently serves as a Deputy Regional Director at the ADL's Washington, D.C. Regional Office. Her portfolio includes oversight of the office's legislative advocacy, community engagement, and coalition partnerships, law enforcement training, and incident response, and media and communications outreach. Prior to that, she served as JCRC's Director of Maryland and Government Relations, where she advanced legislative priorities that focused on advocating for strengthening for hate crime laws, confronting and educating about anti-Semitism, securing security funds for houses of worship, schools and child centers at risk of hate crimes, and enhancing Holocaust education. She's an experienced attorney, a government relations professional who has spent decades engaged in public policy and community use in the Greater Washington area, and a personal friend. Robert Graves joined the Secure Community Network, SCAN, in October 2019 as Regional Security Advisor for the National Capital Region, encompassing Washington, D.C., suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia, which advises Jewish organizations and institutions. In this role, Robert also serves as Director of Security for the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. And he's a great colleague to work with. We've worked together for a couple of years now. He's just a great colleague. Robert brings with him experience and expertise developed over a 35-year career, including 22 years at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, focused on security and counterintelligence matters within the U.S. military, law enforcement, and the intelligence community. Robert came to SCAN from the MITRE Corporation, where he was program manager and principal advisor for counterintelligence, law enforcement, and cybersecurity for U.S. government clients. Now I'm going to call on Chief Davis to please speak for a few moments, to be followed by Meredith, and to be followed by Robert, and then we will open the floor to Q&A. Chief Davis.
Thank you, Ron, and I promise to send you a shorter bio next time. I know you mentioned that we're going to be out of here at 8 o'clock, so it's great to meet you.
I'll even let us go to 8:05, Chief. Don't worry.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us. And I'm here with our executive deputy Police Chief Brian Riley and Major Darrell Nichols, who has served in many capacities in his 30 years with the Fairfax County Police Department. He continues to serve as our equity officer, but most recently, we started out of headquarters a community outreach commander's position so we can have more visibility countywide on our community outreach efforts, which obviously include the faith community. And MPO Eddie Escarate is here as well, the crime prevention officer out of Mason. And of course, Cantor Mike Shockett, who leads our police chaplains for the Fairfax County Police Department. And we spent some time with Mike at his synagogue with our majors and above recently. So our commitment to the faith community, particularly with the Jewish faith community, our synagogues couldn't be any stronger than it is right now. That doesn't mean, however, that there's not a constant effort to make sure that, number one, our relationships are solid. So if crisis does visit our doorstep, we're prepared not only with our training, but with our solid relationships. Because I know you all know enough about what happened in Colleyville, Texas, to realize that the strength of the relationships, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, police chief down there with the rabbi, all of that played a role to a resolution that was more positive than it quite frankly could have been. So we value our relationship with the Jewish community and not just Fairfax County, but the National Capital Region, the DMV. I think the faith communities know no borders, and we realize that there are enduring threats posed to houses of worship and disproportionately enduring threats posed to our Jewish community and synagogues. So anything we can do to support efforts like you mentioned earlier, Ron, before we jumped on this webinar, to enhance our presence, whether it's on-duty resources or secondary employment resources, you can count on us to be a great partner in that regard. So I'm looking forward to the session the most, but just want to thank you for thinking about us and inviting us to be part of this important conversation.
So thank you, Chief. We really appreciate that. I think that, one of the things that has made the difference, unfortunately, there's, when you think of Muncie, you think of Colleyville, you think of Pittsburgh, is like a set of geographic areas that are becoming synonymous in Jewish consciousness with attacks on synagogues. And the one thing that we've been lucky so far for something like that not to happen in this region. But I will tell you that we do, and I think speak for all my colleagues when we say we really have great relationships with the police departments, not in Fairfax, in DC, and Montgomery. This is the conclusion of a third part series with each of the chiefs. And we know you guys speak all the time and are very well connected, and that law enforcement in general here, and a lot of my colleagues around the country don't benefit from that. So I do think it's not the same place. It's not that way. We can't take it for granted. So we really do appreciate that you and your fine team are looking out for our community safety and for the entire community each and every day. Thank you. Now it's turn to Meredith, and please, Meredith, offer a few words.
Thanks, Ron. Chief, good to see you and others. This is, as Ron said, the third series we did, and actually for me, it's the fourth because my office also covers North Carolina, so we did something down with Charlotte, and so this is these presentations, briefings, whatever you want to call them, have been going on across the country since Colleyville. But I think I just want to kind of echo what Ron said and then kind of go into a few other things. Like, this is something, we wish we didn't have to do, but we really are appreciative of the collaborative effort as to the work that, the Jewish community and honestly, a lot of the faith communities have been able to have with the law enforcement locally, because, so much of it is locally based as to what we're seeing. And with that, for anybody on the call who's not familiar with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, it's a centuries-old anti-hate and civil rights organization. We have a dual mission of fighting for the defamation of the Jewish people, fighting anti-Semitism, and securing justice and fair treatment for all. And we're really one of the leading experts in extremism and combating anti-Semitism and rooting out a lot of the hatred and bigotry that we've seen. And when we're really talking about anti-Semitism, unfortunately, right now, being on edge and being vigilant has just become very much a part of the American Jewish experience. And I think, as Ron said in the beginning, look, the past few years, anti-Semitism has reached this high watermark throughout the United States, and the polls are showing Americans are really becoming very increasingly concerned about anti-Semitism, but they're also their own personal and communal security, their safety of just walking into a synagogue or JCC or other Jewish institution. And in the aftermath of the mass shootings that we've seen over the past few years, the two, Tree of Life in Pittsburgh and the Chabad in Poway in 2018, 2019, those were carried out by white supremacists. And then, of course, the attacks we saw in Jersey City, in Muncie, the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, and of course now, what we just saw happen in Colleyville. We also saw a dramatic surge last year during the period of hostilities between Israel and Hamas in May, and there was an increase in anti-Semitic incidents of over 115% from the same period in 2020. So this is just continuing to happen. We're seeing violent assaults in broad daylight, like examples in Times Square in New York City, in neighborhoods in Los Angeles. I mean, it's just continuing, and so much of it is happening online too, online harassment. And then we're seeing that play out, so what I would say, in real life. And, there are a lot of reasons we can debate why this has happened. The bottom line is that there has been a climate that has been allowed to flourish that is, rooted in extremism and hatred and conspiracy theories that is causing a lot of the hate and vitriol that we've been seeing. And what I would just say is, and I've said this phrase, I think, on all these meetings, is that the findings really reinforce that we need a whole of society approach to combat anti-Semitism. And that specifically includes things like security for the community, no matter where it is. And so one of the things that I want to just also highlight is, particularly in Virginia, just from some statistics, numbers and stuff, and where we've seen anti-Semitism. In Virginia as a whole, from the state, there were 49 anti-Semitic incidents that were reported to ADL in 2020. We have our 2020 data, 2021 will be coming out soon. But that number was a 75% increase from 2019. And in 2020, Virginia registered the 10th highest number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in the country for 2020. It's in the top 10. That's not where we want it to be. And most of those incidents were considered harassment, but there were still 16 incidents of vandalism. And thankfully, we haven't seen any that would be considered an assault, but we need to be very careful. We don't want that number to continue to go up, and we could debate why the number may be higher, maybe more people are reporting and stuff, but the reality is the numbers are still there. And 3/4 of American Jews are still more concerned about anti-Semitism today. And so, what does that mean? Well, look, the most recent incident that happened at Congregation Bethel in Colleyville, it became this painful reminder, the fact that our synagogues in particular are continued to be a risk for some type of terrorist attack. And there was no doubt, as more information is still continuing to come out, that we know that the terrorist, the hostage taker, chose his target very carefully. I think the phrase I used on the last meeting was he didn't go and choose like a PetSmart to go into or another type of retail. He specifically chose that target. And it's a reminder of the conspiratorial anti-Semitism, that it's at a core tenet of the extremists across the spectrum. I mean, the terrorist who went into the synagogue thought that the Jews had control of everything here in the United States, and the high rabbi in New York, he could go into any synagogue and get in touch with this high rabbi in New York who could help, essentially influence the government here to get a known terrorist who was actually in jail out. And so that's a painful reminder of what we've seen happening, and that the risks continue to remain very high. And, at ADL, we're really proud that we work closely with law enforcement, that we do trainings for law enforcement about hate crimes, about extremism, ways that they can continue to work with the community. And I'm really glad to be doing this again with JCRC and SCAN, because together, we work very closely, when there are incidents, and honestly, to just continue to provide awareness of the existing and emerging threats to the Jewish community. And this way, together, we can coordinate the appropriate safety protocols. And so with that, Ron, I will turn it back to you.
Great. Robert, if you would please.
Thanks, Ron. Chief Davis, good to see you again. working with you yet again in a new role for you. For those of you who I don't know, and I know many of you on this call, I'm Robert Graves, the Regional Security Advisor here in the National Capital Region from Secure Community Network through partnership with the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. I, like several of my colleagues around the country and a number of other federations, am here as your security resource, placed here within the Federation to support the community at large. Some of the services I provide to community organizations are facility security assessments, threat assessments when we have troubling phone calls, emails, or other communications. I work with the organization and the police, the law enforcement agency, to understand what needs to be done to protect the organization based on that communication. I help organizations build their safety, security, and emergency plans, choose the best fit for purpose solutions for technologies or equipment that may enhance their security. I do training, active threat training, situational awareness training. Those are our two core trainings we provide to all of our community organizations. After this call, I will roll over onto another Zoom call where I'll join a training for one of our Maryland congregations as well this evening. Passing along information, making sure the right relationships and information moves between organizations. That's a key part of their function here. I operate locally a mass notification system where community organizations, registered leaders in the notification system, when there's urgent or immediate information, it's pushed to them by text and email. When they need to take action for the safety of their organization, they can relay that as necessary. I also use that list to forward more routine security information, and that is my invite list for my weekly community security call, where we share information on a variety of safety, security, and emergency preparedness topics. Part of that information sharing, those are liaison or relationships with law enforcement. Work very closely with the local law enforcement in all the districts, in all the jurisdictions here. I see Officer Az Karate from the Mason District, a great partner for a number of our community organizations in Fairfax County, as well as others around the county as well. As he said, I've worked with the chief in the past. When he was at Garda World, he was one of our principal points of contact for our relationship for security on the community campus up in Rockville as well. Also, though, I have on the call tonight, I've asked several of our FBI colleagues to join us. We have Special Agent Charge Michael Glass-Sheen, the head of the Counterterrorism Division at the Washington Field Office of the FBI here. The Washington Field Office has jurisdiction for the District of Columbia and Northern Virginia, and he's joined by several of his team. Supervisory Special Agent Michael Hines. Mike is the community outreach coordinator for the office. And Special Agent Lindsay Coulter's on here. Many of you may know Lindsay as well. She is one of the principal special agents working in the Northern Virginia area on hate crime matters. We work very closely with all of our law enforcement colleagues to ensure that our community organizations are well taken care of. And we have no reservations in that. As Ron pointed out, we have great relationships with local law enforcement. When Colleyville happened, before I could reach out to those agencies, including Fairfax, they were calling me, letting me know what they were doing for the community. So we enjoy a great working relationship there. There's a great exchange of information. I think I've covered the long and short of what I do here. So I'll kick it back to you, Ron, if there are any questions. But real quick, did any of my FBI colleagues want to make a few remarks for the group tonight?
Hey, Robert, Michael Glass-Sheen here. I'll make a couple remarks. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Hey, first of all, thanks for the invitation here. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of the session tonight. And I think just as Chief Davis said, and as well as Ron said and Meredith, I think the key here, unfortunately, with the world that we live in, is just the maintaining the local community engagement. I think what the FBI has to offer, especially in this serious time that we're in right now, is our Joint Terrorism Task Force, which really covers the gamut of the federal, local, and state approach to protecting our communities. And we can't have an impact without Chief Davis and his team, that type of prospect, especially for our areas. And it truly just, again, appreciative to be on the call. We have our outreach folks as well, and we're here to support you in the community. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. So with that, Ron, over to you.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments here. It's interesting. When you hear the chief and you hear Meredith and Robert, you realize that security is not just this simple, a simple task, but is really a conscious mindset that has so many different layers to it that we have to keep in, that we have to remain attuned to and be engaged in all the time. So I'd like to ask you one question to kick it off, and then for those of you who'd like to ask a question, please put it in the chat, and I'll be happy to call on you, and then you can unmute yourself. But the first thing I'd like to ask is, Chief Davis, Meredith, Robert, you all are involved in different aspects, obviously, of security. If there's one thing that you wish you could emphasize today, or one thing that you wish Jewish organizations would do more of, or take them or make avail themselves more of to help their own security, what would that be?
I guess, Ron, I'll go first. There's no singular silver bullet. The value of relationships, and you mentioned it, or someone mentioned it earlier. And I've been, around the country over 3 decades, taking a look at metropolitan jurisdictions, and I've seen the strengths and weaknesses of federal, state, and local partnerships. And the National Capital Region has always been, is, and always will be the strongest group of federal, state, and local law enforcement. Where we sometimes fall short is if there's not a concerted effort in the faith community like the one that your organization, Ron, has, and it takes intentional effort on your part to even gather us for this call. But we should know each other before we need each other. And if all the other faith-based groups, followed your lead, I think we're better off in terms of preparedness. So I don't think we can do things like this enough. I think we shouldn't do it just after a crisis somewhere else. We should leave tonight's meeting with a date and time certain when we're going to gather again. So I think sometimes post-crisis, we gather, we renew our commitment to each other, and we renew our commitment to act in a preventive way, because these threats, the attack in Colleyville, may certainly serve as inspiration to other potential lone wolf attackers here and across the country. So I think we have to have intentional relationships. We have to make time throughout the course of any calendar year to meet with frequency, and then stop what we're doing and come together like this tonight. So that would be, I guess, my singular recommendation.
Well, one of the things we can propose is that, and I can speak, we can all talk about this offline, but is about maybe making sure that we get together a minimum of twice a year as a group. And we do this in each jurisdiction. I know Robert and Mary just said that's 6 meetings, Ron. But that we, Robert's looking at me like, oh boy. Anyway, but if we have like 6 meetings, I mean, that would be 2 in each jurisdiction, maybe, 1 in January and 1 in June or something along those lines, so that, we can get updated, because it is nice for us all to get together. And this way, if we have a more institutionalized basis, our relationships are even stronger, and we're even in a better chance to react. Thank you, Chief. Meredith, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, to actually piggyback off of where Chief Davis started and stuff, there is no one size fits all in this. When you're dealing with anti-Semitism, other forms of hatred and bigotry and stuff, it requires a comprehensive approach, which is, one thing, working directly with law enforcement, doing regular meetings and stuff, and not just when a crisis happens. Also, when something happens, working with them to apprehend the perpetrators, whether it's something like a Zoom bombing incident or it's an attack on a physical building or an individual, looking at educating our youth to prevent incidents ahead of time. I think we talked about this on one of the other calls. So many things that are happening at the school level, K through 12 and on college campuses, and talking about that. When I say a comprehensive approach, it's about stopping things from the beginning. We're talking about, stereotyping, bullying incidents, social issues that are happening day to day, types of threats. Everything is not just at the extremist threat level. Obviously, that tends to be the much more larger scale incidents, but there are still things going on with our young people on a day-to-day basis who are victims, of incidents of anti-Semitism. And so there are a lot of things that we can be doing about, as a community, promoting inclusivity, in our schools, in our buildings, doing interfaith and intergroup type of work. So it's so much more than just the security aspect that we're trying to, to prevent and stuff. That's kind of the approach, that we take. And I think that we can continue to as a community. And the last thing I will just say is, added to that is working on policy recommendations, ways to, whether it's, like Ron, what you've been working on, security funding, or it's strengthening the hate crimes laws, or, just asking our public officials and civic leaders to use their bully pulpits for good, not for, making Holocaust comparisons on a daily basis related to COVID vaccines, which we continue to see. Like all of that as a comprehensive approach is really the way that we can prevent, or at least, stop some of these incidents from getting to the larger scale of where they've been.
Thank you, Meredith. Robert?
The one thing, there could be a laundry list, as everybody pointed out, of to-dos, but I think the one thing that I would like everybody to take away is that we all need to be engaged in this work for our organizations, for our community, for their safety and security and preparedness. We all have a role. We all have a part we can contribute to the effort, however small it might be. And it's not on any one of us to solve the problem, to complete the work, but nor are any of us free to ignore it. I think if we all take a role.
That sounds like a very close Talmudic parable that I know.
You picked up on that.
Do I have the right reference source, Cantor? Okay.
So we should all keep this in mind as a crisis pass, take on the burden of our portion of this effort every day, be engaged with our organizational leaders, with our community leaders. What can we do, whether it's helping to find funding, finding the right policies, or finding the right equipment solutions. It's a mix, whatever it is, but we all have a part in this, even if it's just helping our organization on a day-to-day basis, keep the doors closed, that should be closed. Those little things all count. So if we'll all be engaged and contribute to the lift, then we'll all be that much safer.
Thank you, Robert. Cantor Shockett would like to offer a comment.
Well, I would just say how great it is that all of these people are speaking about the things that we are at Temple Road of Shalom are thinking about most right now. And Ron, thank you for hosting this. We appreciate everything that JCRC does in the community.
Thank you.
Today, as a matter of fact, Major Nichols was at our congregation, and he was with another set of officers that were teaching our staff on what's called craze training, which is kind of similar to run, hide, fight.
What exactly is that, Cantor? What is craze training?
Craze stands for Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events, I think, if I'm getting that right. Yes, Major Nichols is shaking his head. It's just like run, hide, fight. They just use different acronyms.
Right.
But the idea is that our staff since Colleyville, is really thinking about what they're going to do in the event of some type of active violence situation. And we're looking at it in three different silos, if you will, right? We're looking at our infrastructure. What are we as a synagogue doing to make sure that we're still welcoming and we're not a fortress, but at the same time, we're protecting ourselves and mitigating risk. Secondly, we're looking at our policies, procedures, and that includes training like today. And then thirdly, and I think to me, one of the most important is the relationship building that some of you had already underscored. I think Meredith, you were talking about that too. And so important, not just, I have a great relationship already with Chief Davis and with those sitting in his conference room there, and with the Fairfax County Police and the McLean Station where we're located. But it's also important to realize that in this community, and we saw this at Colleyville too, that if something happens in our congregation, it's not just Fairfax County Police it's coming, it's everybody's coming. And we sit a mile outside of Arlington County, we sit a mile from Falls Church City, even though we're in Fairfax County. So having those relationships, SSA Hines, who's on the call tonight, is coming to meet with us next week from the FBI. We work together with Laura Katzif, who's on the call, who's with the JCC. And all of us together are looking at ways to build those relationships so that if something does happen, we're communicating about it, and that people, especially in the law enforcement community, know our building, know our synagogue. You know, Ron, we're the largest synagogue in in Virginia, and we're right behind Washington Hebrew for the region, and so we used to be this sleepy little synagogue that nobody heard of, and we were tucked away in the woods, and now we're all, you know, concerned that we have become more and more of a target. So that relationship building is really important, not just with law enforcement, but with our interfaith partners. Thank you to Ramona Carroll, who helps make that happen, and all of the community leaders as well. So just thank you to all of you who really clearly make this a priority.
Could I echo the Cantor's points on relationship building, having those ongoing relationships with your local law enforcement partners, so that they know your not just your facility, but your congregation as a group, your membership. They know your community as it is, your constituencies, your concerns, your needs, your expectations. Having that kind of two-way relationship building is incredibly valuable on just day-to-day criminal law enforcement challenges or trespassing issues or other concerns you may have, much less when the critical incident of such high impact may happen. Having those relationships are invaluable, that you know your local crime prevention or community service officer, that you know the patrol officers who are routinely there, that you know the command staff for your district, and that they all know your organization as well. Take advantage of social opportunities to invite them in for Kiddush and Onegs and for Purim spiels, any public facing event. Give them a chance to get to know your congregation. At the same time, building those neighborhood relationships with your interfaith partners. Those are invaluable as well. You'll find times where you can reinforce each other and you can support each other. Building the relationships now are what will help us adapt to adversity down the road a little bit.
You're muted, Ron.
Probably the best I've sounded in a long time. Carolyn says, people are coming in the chat box. People are coming into congregations with concealed guns. Any suggestions on how to prevent this, Chief?
Well, I'm going to tap in MPO Eddie Ascarati on that one as well, but and Cantor Shocking. So individual synagogues can certainly prohibit the carrying of firearms inside synagogues. So I don't know to the extent, maybe MPO Ascarati or Cantor Shocking, you can help me out and tell me how often that happens and how it's communicated and or posted. But that's certainly a prohibition that the synagogues can choose to put into place. Great care needs to be taken on how that's advertised, because you could be sending unintentionally a message to people who want to do you harm as well, unwittingly.
So and Virginia is an open carry state.
Right. So
problem. We have no matter, and I had this problem in Arizona also. It's just where you are in places where there's a gun culture. It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't matter if we verbally tell people that they're not allowed to carry. They still do. And not really, I'm hearing from congregants that more and more people are coming in with guns. And I'm looking for some guidance on how to communicate maybe individually with them. And I wanted to say also that we had Bubba doing that craze training yesterday, and I could listen to him read the phone book. Like, he's the best.
Bubba's great. And when we were with Cantor Shocking a couple of weeks ago at the synagogue. Maybe Mike, I'll tap you in on this, but we talked about the presence of off-duty federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, and how the rabbi and her staff can ensure that type of presence with expectations built in. Mike, do you want to go into that a little bit? It's a dynamic.
Yes, absolutely. And let me also just say that about guns, we dealt with this issue at Temple Rose Shalom before COVID happened. We were talking about it, and it was a real interesting debate. We don't have a lot of members that bring guns unless they're law enforcement members, and then each one of those members knows that they may be armed in the synagogue, and they should tell our security people, our off-duty officers or director of security. But for everyone else, we prohibit it. So we have, even though I think, and maybe Eddie could even talk about this, I think that the school of thought is you shouldn't really publicly prohibit it in a way that is so, a big sign outside to say no guns here, because we don't want people to then see us as a target. On the other hand, we do have, or we will have shortly, a little sign on the door that says, with a little, no guns picture icon, because I think that the thought is that we then can tell someone they can't bring in their gun, if they're here as just a worshiper. Our director of security does not want to have a gunfight go on in our synagogue. So that's why we're taking that approach.
I'm sorry.
Ron.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead, Meredith.
So the other thing is, and I don't remember where it fell eventually and stuff, but Virginia state has actually looked at some laws, whether open carry or not. There are laws that are passed in many states related to whether or not you can carry a gun in a house of worship. And there have been a couple of bills in Virginia, and most of them have failed unless, and I think the language is something like, you have good and sufficient reason to carry. So I just don't remember off the top of my head where it ultimately is, but I think it was like 2 years ago, and the bill did fail. Now, it doesn't mean it couldn't get revived, but you can't always, so that's regardless of what your synagogue wants to do. Most houses of worship, that is, something to consider if it's not. And I know JCRC has looked at this bill before.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about the craze training that Carolyn was referring to? Was it Carolyn or Cantor Shaka was referring to?
It's great. It's external facing, Ron, and I too want to acknowledge Ramona Carroll, who's here on the line with us. Ramona leads our community impact unit, the county's community impact unit. Hi, Ramona, in community services, and her reach is countywide. So, Ramona, thank you for being on. And for craze, Ron, the civilian response to active shooter events, and like Cantor Shaka mentioned, it's our version of run, hide, fight. Maybe I can tap in MPO Ascarati if you're still on the line.
I'm still here.
Why don't you subject matter expert my way out of this question?
Certainly.
Yeah, and can you tell us briefly, like a little bit about what is if a congregation brings you in to learn about this techniques, like what are they going to learn how to do?
When we bring the craze training to you, it is similar to whatever run, hide, fight training you've already received. When I give that presentation, I am one of the ones that have been instructed on how to give that presentation. We use the only different acronym is avoid, deny, defend. It's ADD instead of run, hide, fight. It's the exact same definitions: run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend. We will present the problem. In other words, an act of violence of some sort is going on, and then discuss how individuals are going to respond, what you as an individual is going to do in a situation that's high stress, sudden, and understand your limitations. And then from there, we want to discuss a little bit as to how the institution is prepared to respond, whether it be through policy, procedure, training, practice, general guidance, whatever that may be. That may include ushers, greeters, that may include actual security personnel, whether they be formal or informal. We will discuss all those options and make sure that everyone has an understanding as to what their response is potentially going to be. No one knows what they're going to do until they're in a situation like that, but at least gives them an idea to think about it and understand what some of the possibilities are. We take it a step further in Fairfax, where we're going to also make sure that the individuals understand how we as law enforcement are going to respond when we first arrive. And that is, the first couple of officers that arrive are going straight to the threat. We are going to stop any further violent action from occurring. So we may walk over and pass people who are injured. It's not that we don't care, it's that we want to prevent anyone else from further harm. So we're going to address that first, understand that help is coming. And that's kind of the way we do it. Without getting into the whole class now, I could talk about it for the next 3 hours. We want to make sure that you have an understanding. That's kind of the way it goes. I'm going to shift out for just a moment. I'd like to reiterate and support what Kent Shochet was saying in terms of the guns and some of the preparation stuff and some of the discussion that was said there. Whenever I speak with an institution, the institution has to make a decision themselves. I advocate that they do not publicly advertise one way or the other. That's the only time I give my personal opinion. I want to make sure that you guys make a decision, but I want to make sure that you understand, if you put anything out there where I can surveil and learn where your weaknesses are, that is going to be one of the things I'm going to be looking for as someone who might attack that institution. So we want to make sure that that is clear. If you have, whether people are telling the institution that they are armed or not, whether you have law enforcement that are armed or not, when uniformed personnel arrive to an active situation, I can't tell you if you are the bad guy or a law enforcement officer off duty. So even there, it's a concern for those kinds of situations. We, as law enforcement, I live in Fairfax County. I carry in Fairfax County 99% of the time. But I am going to be extra cautious if an active violent event occurs when I'm not on duty, because I am not going to be seen as a police officer. They don't all know me. I've been here a long time, but they don't all know me. So I don't want to take that chance of getting shot when I pull out a gun. And the same thing's going to happen. I don't know all the government agents that are going to be around. I don't know those that may lawfully be carrying. Those laws that were referenced earlier, that I think it was Meredith brought that up, is going to also needs to be looked at. My understanding is that law is very weak. That's my understanding. I'm not a politician. I don't know exactly what the status is on those things. But there's a lot of leeway in how some of those were worded. So a lot of people can get away with it and still legally be carrying, is my understanding.
Yeah, Meredith just put up the law. If any person can carry any gun, pistol, Bowie knife, danger, other dangerous weapon without good and sufficient reason to a place of worship while meeting for religious purposes is being held such a place, he shall be guilty of a class 4 misdemeanor. So there's the law, right? Right.
Good and sufficient reason. That's where the debate will be in court.
Yes, and that has been the debate, and there have been bills introduced to strengthen it, and then there's been bills to relax it. But this is where we are, at least today.
Chief Davis, what other in light of the growing threat of not just anti-Semitism but bigotry in the community, have there been any other Fairfax County police resources being increased or devoted to this rise in anti-Semitism and bigotry? While over 60%, pretty much sum it up, the ADL, quote is pretty much that we're less than 2% of the population and 60% approximately of all religious-based hate crimes. We've also seen Sikhs being targets of hate crimes, and Muslims and Asian Americans and African Americans. And I'm just wondering, as you're sitting there in charge of protecting a county of over 1 million people, what's going through your head right now in terms of deploying resources and about how to meet this growing challenge?
Yeah, Ron, it is a growing challenge, and I'll add 300,000 to your 1 million. So 1.3 million. I think Fairfax County is larger than 8 states in America. So
you're bigger than Montgomery County because we're 1.1 million. Yeah.
We got you. We got you there, Ron. But you know, one thing that I know that we spoke about on the phone recently is, you know, the largest 5 jurisdictions where there certainly synagogues beyond the 5 largest jurisdictions, but Fairfax and Prince William and Washington, D.C. and Prince George's County and Montgomery County, the Big 5, as I like to call it. And you know, I've known all those police chiefs, to include Prince George's County's new police chief from Texas, Malik Aziz. I've known him for a number of years when he was with another national Black law enforcement officers organization. But getting us together in the same room, maybe Meredith, getting a couple local prosecutors in the room as well, so they can interpret some of this legislation, because I think that class 4 misdemeanor is only a summons. So just kind of, you know, to gauge their political appetite, but you know, encouraging police officers to be aware of suspicious activities, to include completing suspicious activity reports, relying on particularly our crime prevention officers like MPO Officer Ascarati to educate not only our external facing constituents, but our internal police officers, what it takes to pass along suspicious activity reports that may not be criminal in nature, but are suspicious, and to get them to our Northern Virginia Regional Intelligence Center, the NIVRIC. You know, that's Virginia's intelligence center, fusion center, if you will, right here in Fairfax County. And then to take advantage of our many task force relationships, our joint terrorism task force relationships that we have with the FBI. I know the FBI is on this call, and we have you know, many task force relationships that are constantly in play. After Colleyville, Ron, there was a suspicious incident at a synagogue in Annandale, and a man entered the synagogue in Annandale and asked to speak to a rabbi regarding a book on Nazis. He was loud, apparently belligerent, had to be escorted out. But we responded to that and captured that incident and passed it along to our intelligence arm of the police department. And our intelligence arm, of course, enjoys relationships with federal law enforcement authorities. So it's just having an organizational expectation to take bias complaints very, very seriously, and to pass them along to the right people within our organization, to pass them along to our federal partners. So we're able to get in front of things, or able to act left of boom. If law enforcement is acting right of boom, that means something bad has already happened. So left of boom is where we need to be, and it takes constant vigilance.
Debbie Bruce said she'd like to give a shout out to the Prince William Police Department and the ongoing support they've given. That's Chief Newsham, Prince William, if I remember. Yes, who used to be in DC, who I know quite well. So I'm going to just stop. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to put in the chat box? Do so, please, now. I'll give you 5 seconds, 10 seconds to do that. And if not, I'm going to ask each of our panelists if they just want, you know, a minute or so to sum up or to offer any parting words. Okay, well, we'll start. We'll do in reverse order. Robert, any parting words you'd like to offer? Any parting advice, sir?
Thanks, Ron. Just a couple of things I'd like to highlight as we wrap up here tonight. On the topic of firearms and armed security for our synagogues, 2 years ago, SCN produced a white paper, Firearms in the Faithful. I dropped a link.
Which you've put in the chat box, I see.
Yes, I dropped a link in the chat. I have participated in several town halls with community organizations to help with that discussion. There are recommendations in the paper, ways to think about the problem, but again, the choice is the individual congregations. But I've been part of those discussions and helped more than one organization come to a good solution for itself. So feel free to call on me that for any time. As with the CRAZE training, our partners at Fairfax County Police we also provide active threat training for community organizations. We use the run, hide, fight model. As Eddie said, it's the same thing, just different words. So I'm also available to do that training for our community organizations as well. Going out, if I could just remind everybody of, like I said, there are 5 basic things. If I'm going to tick off a list of things that we want everybody to do, please get a security assessment of your facility. That gives you a snapshot of your posture and helps you start the roadmap to improvement. Secondly, develop a written plan for your safety, security, and emergencies for your organizations and facilities. Third, take advantage of the grant programs. The federal program, the state program in Virginia is new, but I think it's going to be a great resource for all of you as well. Okay. And then lastly, training. Take advantage of the training. Situational awareness training, active threat training, crime prevention training, any kind of relevant training for your safety and security of your organizations, whether you get it through Fairfax County Police, Department of Homeland Security, Protective Security Advisors, myself and my colleagues at SCN, wherever you can find the training, take the training both as individuals and organizations. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Meredith, ma'am, go ahead.
So I'm going to take just a different approach, not the security approach, because you have all the security experts on here. Although I spend a lot of time with them, so I probably could do the training one of these days. All joking aside, though, I think that the one thing from a community perspective, when we're looking at a lot of this, we need to not just look at the individual incidents that are happening, but we need to remember where some of it is coming from. And we need to remember that a lot of the hate, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, another form of bigotry, we see a lot of anti-LGBTQ stuff, we see Black churches attacked. We need to just remember that a lot of that has started with the normalization, I would say, of less damaging forms of bias. I talked a lot about what happens at the schools and stuff, and we need to remember that's laying the foundation where then we start seeing these incidents, the acts of bias, discrimination, and eventually some of those, because of conspiracy theory stuff that's out there, that they believe, like I said, the Jews control the virus, the COVID virus, we profit off the vaccine. I mean, all of that kind of stuff, people just start to believe it, unfortunately, and then a lot of that, becomes, turns into violence that can grow unchecked. And that's when we see some of these more major incidents. So we as a community, when we see anything, even at the lowest level, we need to call it out and we need to continue to report it so that we can establish if there's patterns happening and how can we sort of fight back against that. And that's where education comes in so much, and the community engagement work, which is a huge part of this. So with that.
Yeah, basically words matter. Words do matter. And one of the most important things that, in addition to that, we didn't spend that much talking about it. I mean, JCRC works on a lot of the grant programs, but we are in creating them and helping increase funding from. But we spend a lot of time on we spend a tremendous amount of time, but with our interfaith efforts that are led across the region by Rabbi Abby Sharovsky, because people underestimate how important it is when an incident of bigotry occurs. They don't underestimate how important it is, and it's been in my years of experience, that non-Jews denounce anti-Semitism, or when there's something against African Americans, that it's people who are not anti-African, who are not African American, who denounce it. Because if you're sitting, it's one thing for a Jew to denounce anti-Semitism. It's a different thing when a collection of society gets together, when collective society gets together to denounce it and says that this is not acceptable. And we know that all it takes is a few words, and people become self-radicalized. And we know, look, Jewish history is replete with persecution. We know people believe this garbage. It doesn't take much for people who get a bit of hate in their head and may not be under the best conditions in life to become self-radicalized and become violent. Chief Davis, you and your colleagues there can have the closing words.
Sure, and I think, Ron, those interfaith efforts, particularly with other vulnerable faith communities like the African American churches, and I know you work on this constantly, and Meredith and your team, and it's important. I think, Ron, to continue to use your position as the long-serving executive director of the JCRC, and to continue to use the status and the weight of your office and your position. I think you have great convening power, and I think I would just encourage you to continue to use your convening power, and I look forward to on a more regular basis these types of gatherings. I'm not trying to give you all more work to do, because I know it takes a lot to put these things together, Meredith. But thank you for including us. Consider us your partner through thick and thin.
So, Chief, thank you. And I think with that, we're going to close down and say thank you to our panelists for their very, very comprehensive, insightful, thought-provoking, interesting, and reassuring words. And I also want to thank all of you who cared to join us tonight. Hope you learned something. Hope you had a chance to ask the questions on your mind. And as the chief said, this went out, I think, and as I'm deciding right now, this won't be the first, this won't be the last of this. We won't just convene when there's incidents. We used to at JCRC do a security briefing about every 2 years. And then we found out that attendance dipped when we were doing it every year because people felt that they had already heard it. And every 2 years people started. But now I think with the rise of anti-Semitism again and security back on everybody's mind, the time has come, at least for the leadership of Jewish institutions that we have on this call throughout the region, to gather at least twice a year just to connect and talk what's on our mind. And so that we have an opportunity, not just for a monologue, but an opportunity for a dialogue. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your being here tonight, and stay safe, stay well, and hope you are emerging from COVID slowly, and that perhaps we'll see each other in person soon. Best wishes and good night.